Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me here today as I'm continuing my travels across Canada to have a collection of conversations about Alberta self-determination. You now find me here in Montreal, Quebec, to have another conversation with some fabulous guests. And what we're doing here is we're trying to find out a little bit of the history of the Quebec separation movement, the results, where could it have gone, had it gone a different way, and maybe some lessons that Alberta can learn from our particular movement as well. So I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing the leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier. Bonjour, comment ça va, mon ami?
Très bien. Thank you, Jason. I'm very pleased to be with you today.
It's very great to be in your city for once. I find you in Alberta all the time.
Yes, welcome in Montreal.
It's a lovely city. There's a lot of traffic. I definitely had to fight through some of that today. And how are you doing?
Yes, great. You know, I was in Alberta a couple of days ago. There's a by-election, as you may know, for Poilievre. He wants to be elected, and we have a great candidate, Jonathan. I was there for Canada Day, and I will be back in Alberta. You know, and to tell people over there why they must not vote for Poilievre and why they must support our candidate and the People's Party.
Absolutely. And now one of the things about Pierre in this particular by-election is the sovereignty movement. Yeah. Alberta, as you saw while you were there, there's a lot of people that are looking for some change. They don't like the status quo anymore. Yeah. They want some change, all the way to independence and separation. Yeah. Did you see that while you were there?
Oh, absolutely. I was at the 1st of July parade, and after that we went to a freedom separatist rally. And that was fun. People are fed up, and I understand that. Albertans are tired of Ottawa telling them what to do or what not to do. And I delivered a speech at that rally, and I told them, you must have your referendum on separation or secession or sovereignty. I hope it will be in 2026. But also I told them, it will be good for you if you vote yes. And some people did ask me, Maxime, you're a leader of a Federalist party. How come are you okay with Albertan separation? And my answer to that is in line with me personally, because in the referendum, the 1995 referendum here in Quebec, where the yes won with 51% and the no won with 51% and the yes 49%. And Jason, at that time, I did vote yes. I voted yes because I wanted the federal government to respect our constitution. And in 1995, we had a federal government that was interfering in provincial jurisdictions. And today it is worse. It is worse. And with 49%, after that, nothing changes. We didn't have any chance with that 49%. Federalist politician told Quebecers, we will give more autonomy to Quebec and blah, blah, blah. But we have a worse, a bigger interventionist government today than if you compare that with 1995. And I can understand why Albertan wants to go. But for me, after that, I was very disappointed with the federal government. And in 2006, I decided to jump into federal politics with Stephen Harper. And actually, when I've met Stephen Harper a couple of months before the election, he was looking for ideas for his platform in Quebec. And I told him, I said, Mr. Harper, if you want to have some votes in Quebec, you need to tell them two things. First, you will respect the Constitution. That's important because in Quebec we have two national sports, referendum and hockey. And so you must respect the Constitution. And second, lower taxes. So if you're telling that to Quebec, it would be good for every province because lower taxes would be good for everybody. And respecting the Constitution, if you respect for Quebec and you don't interfere in provincial jurisdictions, that will be good for other provinces. So he did that. But Harper and I decided to run in 2006. And Harper was a good manager of a big fat government. Actually, he did increase the equalization payments to please Quebec when he was prime minister. So I was not satisfied, and Harper was not a real conservative. So we decided in 2018 to create the People's Party. And the position of the People's Party is to have a radical decentralization. But when I was at that rally, the 1st of July, people looked at me and they said, Maxime, forget radical decentralization. We are not there anymore. We don't want that. Can you understand? We're fed up with you guys. And I said, okay. I said, I can understand that. But my message to you is I did vote yes in 1995. And because I wanted to have a better federation in line with our constitution, like the fathers of our constitution decided, if you respect the constitution, provinces will have more autonomy. Yeah, I know that Alberta, you want your pension fund, your police force, and all the same jurisdictions and powers that Quebec has, and more, because the federal government is blocking the development of your natural resources and the climate accord. And you are fed up. So what I said to them, I said I voted yes. Nothing happened after that because we didn't win the referendum. And I decided to jump into federal politics, try to change the conservative, respecting a constitution. Nothing happened. We created the People's Party. So for you, if you have a referendum, I wish that you will vote yes, because if you don't vote yes, Quebec with 49%, nothing happened. So nothing will happen. So if you vote yes, for me, you'll have two options. You will be independent, and you'll decide if you want to go back in Canada in line with the Constitution at your conditions, or you don't and you stay independent, or you go with Trump and you're the 51st state. So you'll have not three options on the table. And my goal as a Federalist leader, I will want you to be back in Canada. That will be my end goal. I want you to be back in Canada by respecting our Constitution. And if there's a deal with the federal government and you, with Alberta, that would be the same for every province. So it's a win-win for this country. And I said during the campaign that this country is going nowhere. And we, the People's Party, we are the last hope for this country. And now, you are here, you're traveling across the country, and it's great to have that discussion. But I'm looking at Danielle Smith, and she tried to use the separatists to have a better deal with Carney. But I'll be, and I said that also, I'll be with you guys at your referendum campaign if you want me. I'll be the only Federalist leader that will say to you, yes, vote yes. So that's why I'm very okay with that. But also, what's happening in Quebec here, Jason, is the PQ. The PQ is ahead in the polls right now. They have a young, charismatic leader. They're a bit socialist, the PQ. They're not, right-wing, but they're ahead of the polls because of their position on immigration. Quebec wants to preserve their culture, their language, and mass immigration is destroying, the social fabric of this country and Quebec. So, and the leader of the PQ is speaking a little bit like me on immigration. That's why he's a little bit popular. But he's saying at the same time, if I'm elected and the next provincial election in Quebec will be in 2026, so in 1 year, and he said, if I'm elected, I will have a referendum the first year of my mandate. So you may have a referendum in 2026, and Quebec may have a referendum in 2027. So we'll see what will happen.
And this isn't a new position for you, not just 95 for Quebec, but for Alberta. So prior to the election of Carney, you were also supporting this position. This is one of the things I ran on because around Edmonton, west of Edmonton, where I was running in Parkland, this is a very important conversation there. You brought up immigration. Yeah. There's the economy issue as well. We've got our energy issues as well, going to market. These all came together, and the only solution really was Alberta needs to take a lead on its own resources and its own future and its own prosperity. Yeah. So you were on board with this idea even before Carney's election.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's part of our platform, and that's why when we are saying radical decentralization, it's a real decentralization. In Ottawa, you'll have a very small government. You'll be able to develop your own natural resources, no more climate change accord, withdraw from the Paris Accord. You will control your health care. As you know, right now, the federal government is giving to provinces $52 billion a year for healthcare, and it's a provincial jurisdictions. So we want every province to be more independent, and we'll give the GST to the provinces. That would be a provincial tax. They will rate about the same amount, $52 billion. And like that, you'll be able to have also more private delivery in healthcare so the Canada Healthcare Act will change to allow different models. So that's part of our platform. And that's why, for me, when you have a federal government in Ottawa that is big and interfering, is not respecting what Quebec wants. And that federal government is not respecting what Albertan wants and people in PI. So this country is diverse, and we have different regions with different culture. So if you have one central government that is controlling everything, Quebec won't be happy, Alberta won't be happy. But if you have a decentralized, like it's supposed to be, these different culture across the country will be able to prosper.
Now, back in the 90s, Preston Manning came forward with the Reform Party because Alberta was pretty fed up back then as well. And the question on the table was, or actually the demand was, Alberta wants in.
Yeah.
So after that experiment, we learned pretty quickly that the East doesn't want Alberta in. But just before the election, Preston Manning came out and says, if Carney wins, that will be a real big point in Alberta's future to maybe have another separation conversation. And at that time, much like a lot of issues, Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney agreed that that shouldn't be the future of Alberta, that they stay unified, keep those elbows up and have those conversations. So once again, Pierre did not seem to see what Alberta's looking for or really connected to Albertans. Were you surprised to hear Pierre take the same position as Mark Carney?
No, I'm not, because for the Conservative Party, the most important is to win seats, is to be in power. And there's more seats in the big GTA around Toronto than in all Alberta. And all our immigrants are going there. And so that's why. And Poilievre is coming from Ottawa. He was elected about, 20 years in Parliament in Ottawa. And now, he's moving to Alberta to be elected. But that being said, Poilievre is not answering your requests and is doing politics by pandering to Quebec and Ontario. And that's not new for me. That's why, during the last campaign, I had a lot of our partisan who told me, Maxime, I'm a founding member of the party. I voted for the People's Party in 2019, in 2021. But this time, I want to get rid of Trudeau and the Liberals, and I will vote for Poilievre. But Maxime, after the election, I'll be back and I'll be a member of the People's Party. So all these people, 700,000 people who moved from us to the Conservative, now they have Carney. So they were showing that strategic voting is not functioning. And, you must vote in line with your values if you're on something. And for Alberta, that's the same. People in Alberta must vote in line with their values. And Poilievre, what he's doing is taking the vote of Albertans for granted. That's what he's doing. So I'm not surprised because Carney and Poilievre are the same. And not only on that, but a lot of issues also, climate change. And Poilievre, actually, I was at the 1st of July parade, like I told you, in Alberta. And Poilievre was at that parade. And I was looking at him. I didn't see him, but people told me he was there. He was there maybe half an hour just to show. But the discussion that I had with people over there was about, Maxime, what are you doing here? We're fed up with the federal government. And, there's a lot of separatists here. I said, yes. And I took some time to explain my position. And they said, oh, that would be great. I think we will need your help when that referendum will come, because that will be different. You're going to give us a little bit of credibility by a Federalist leader telling us vote yes. And that's what's great. And that's why I believe my candidate and our candidates, Jonathan, will be able to do good at that by-election.
Now, the last election for this particular riding was around 83%. It was the highest turnout for Conservative in Alberta, second in the country. I think Saskatchewan had another one higher, but second in the country. Were you surprised that Poilievre lost his seat near Ottawa? And our second question, are you surprised he picked Alberta to go ahead and run in?
No, I'm not so surprised that he lost his seat because of the changes in the boundaries of the riding. I think that was not helping him. He had more voters near Ottawa, and that was not a real rural riding like it was before. So the redefinition of the borders was not in his favor. And second, people in that riding, after 20 years, they decided to have a change, and they decided to vote for another candidate. So what I'm surprised is he is still, wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I know that Rob Ford in Ontario is looking for that job, but usually, when the leader, he was 10 points in advance, and now he's back 10 points behind in the polls, and he's looking for being elected in Alberta. For me, he's a guy from central Canada going to Alberta to be elected, and his candidate has, like you said, 83% of the vote, something like that. I hope that he will have fewer votes than his candidate, and if our candidates, Jonathan, can have 10-20% of the vote, that will be good, and like that, people in that riding will send a message saying, Pierre, you came here to be elected, but you are not defending our values. So we'll see what will happen. But Poilievre is a career politician, and he will do everything to stay the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, but after that to be elected as Prime Minister when the next general election will come. And but if he wants to be Prime Minister, like I told you, he won't give you anything, because he won't be able to be elected if he's speaking like the People's Party and telling the truth to Canadians. So that will be interesting to watch.
So this by-election might be like a little referendum then. Like, it's not going to change the government, this one seat, if it went Liberal, which it won't.
Yeah.
But it won't change the government. It'll just renew the leader of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
But if it's anywhere near 70%, 60% support, this will be a bit of a referendum on what's actually to come, possibly with the actual referendum in 2026.
Absolutely, and that would be. And there's no risk. There's no risk for people living in this riding to vote for the People's Party at the by-election.
Now, the result of the election was a bit of a surprise for people in Alberta. Maybe not out of the East, because if you looked at the polls, it was pretty strong for Carney. But in Alberta, their hearts were crushed for a moment. Yeah. And then they realized that this might be the door that can open for separation. So there was a lot of people in Alberta who were actually kind of excited with those results. Were you surprised to hear that?
No, because I understand that people in Alberta voted Conservative, and at that election, they had a proof that you can vote Conservative and that won't change the government. Mm-hmm. So doing always the same thing all the time and try to have a different result, it is not happening, So that's why I believe now people and Albertans are looking, okay, we voted Conservative, and we still have a Liberal government, and we have a Conservative leader that is not Conservative. He's only Conservative. That party is only Conservative in name. So I'm not surprised that now they're looking for another option, and at the provincial level. I know that there's a Republican Party also. I've met the leader when I was in Alberta a couple of days ago. And they did very well. They had 80% of the vote in one by-election at the provincial level. That's very good. So I think that the future will be very interesting for Albertans. And if they have the courage because you need some courage to vote yes at the referendum. You don't know what can be the uncertainty. Like I told you, there's maybe three options: independent, a new relationship with Canada, or maybe the 51 state, and that can be scary for some people. But you need to have the courage. If you don't like what is happening right now with our federal government, I believe that they don't have any choice than vote at this separate sovereignty or for the sovereignty at the next referendum when it will happen in 2026. Yeah.
April 28th was a big night for Canada because that was the election. But something I haven't shared with you was the very first phone call I had after we got the results was Jeffrey Rath.
Yeah.
So he's out in Alberta. He's a lawyer, really pushing forward on this. And he read to me his draft that he was going to release on the 29th about, it's time, Alberta.
Yeah.
So he was really excited, very pleased with the results of Carney. And the next conversation was Mitch Sylvester, so the CEO of the APP, Alberta Prosperity Project, who let me know that as soon as the announcement came out, the first 2 hours, 4,000 new members of the APP signed up. And my last conversation was Danielle Smith, who let me know that the very next day she's going to release some changes to
9 points.
She was going to release the changes to the Elections Act and a bunch of Citizen Initiative Act changes as well, which will lower the threshold down from 600,000 to 177,000. So before I went to bed, it was a mixed night for me. At first I lost, but then I also learned that it looks like Alberta's heading towards separation or independence, or at least that conversation is going to heat up now. Yeah. Are you surprised to see Danielle make changes to the laws with Bill 54, which just got ratified on Friday, July 4th?
Yeah, yes and no. I think, she's using that to try to have more ammunitions when she will have negotiations with Carney, and saying, our people, they may have a referendum on the secession, but she's not a separatist because, she can call the referendum right now. She's in government. She can do that. But no, she's using the process, and that will be Albertans who will have to start that process. So she's using that to have a better deal with Carney. But she's playing with fires right now. Yes, she tried, and now you have that movement that is up and running. And I don't know, and she said she tried to speak, to both sides a little bit, and she said that she's not a separatist. That's clear. So we'll see what will be, and she's trying to have a deal with Carney, and she said she has 9 points or something like that. But you want more than that, and Albertans want more than that. So that would be interesting what she will do. But if you're a separatist, I believe that Danielle Smith is not your friend. She will fight the separatists when that referendum will start. But you'll have on the other side, maybe you'll have the U.S. and President Trump that will be on your side. Because don't forget, in the referendum that we had in Quebec in 1995, the State Department in U.S. was Federalist for a united Canada. And so when you are in a campaign, they were telling to Quebec, if you're independent, you won't be able to have access to the market, the U.S. market. The free trade with the U.S. won't be enforced anymore. So now, you have the State Department that is telling you guys, if you have a referendum and we may take position on your side, that will help to have more people because it will be more less. You'll have less uncertainties than if you have the U.S. on side with the separatists. Like that, you'll be able to still have access to the U.S. market. So that would be very interesting, that campaign.
Very true. And we'll go back to Danielle for a second, then we'll get to Trump. So shortly after the election, Danielle had a bit of a conference, and she was on stage in Bonnyville, Alberta, where it was a UCP event. And it was very clear, Mitch Sylvester was hosting that event, it was very clear that the UCP is ready for independence. 66% of the party itself has voted for independence. So you're right, she's playing with fire because her own party wants to make that move. But she's really trying to, walk the line to try and keep maybe the rest of Alberta at the table for the conversation. Now, at that event, she gave Carney 6 months, and she listed out her points that she wanted to address. But just as recently, about 2 weeks ago, I saw her change her tone. She's starting to call him two-faced, and he is not sticking to his conversations earlier after the election. So do you think she's starting to see Carney for who he might really be?
Yes, and I believe that she may be disappointed. So if she's not able to have everything that she's asking for, and what we must understand that she's asking for the respect of our Constitution. That's it. Mm-hmm. A PPC government will give that and more to Alberta. But that being said, she may be disappointed at the end of these negotiations. And I don't know if she will have the courage to be on your side. It's a little bit like Robert Bourassa in Quebec during the Meech Lake Accord. He said, we have 5 conditions, and if the federal government the federal government does not accept these conditions, the Quebec can have a referendum or blah, blah, blah. But Bourassa was not a separatist. But at that time, when the Meech Lake Accord didn't pass, the separatist sentiment in Quebec was very high, maybe 70%, something like that. And Bourassa didn't have the courage to have a referendum at that time. But that may be the same. That can be your Meech Lake Accord if Carney is not giving what Danielle Smith is asking for, and that's nothing. That can help the separatist movement. And so I don't know if Danielle Smith will be a Bourassa or maybe a Parizeau. So if she's a Bourassa, she will try and do nothing. If she's a Parizeau, she will go ahead with a referendum, and you may have a chance to win.
Time may tell exactly who she's going to be. Maybe she needs to read Carney's book, Values, because he's very clear in that book what his future looks like, and it does not include a very prosperous Alberta. So maybe she just needs to pick that book up and make a decision and pick a lane.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, when it comes to Trump, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was Bill Clinton who was opposing the separation of Quebec back in the day. In fact, the U.S. media came up here and called it a crisis. They were reporting here as it was a crisis, a collapse of Canada, the dollar will drop, it will change trade. And they also said they have to renegotiate treaties and tariffs and all that kind of stuff with the U.S. This time is a little bit different. So Jeffrey Rath and a few other people went down to the U.S. to speak with Rubio's team. And they said, yes, if you have a referendum with a yes vote and Ottawa does not recognize it, the U.S. will. So this time around, it does look like there's some U.S. support. And maybe this is why they keep saying 51st state, Canada should become one, because they actually want to see a little bit more independence up here in Canada and potentially Alberta and maybe even Quebec. So what are your thoughts now under this new environment? It's not Clinton, which is a Democrat. We got a Republican here, which is a little bit more pro-freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good for you guys. The timing is good, and the fact that the U.S. is taking that position, like I said, that will help in a referendum. That will give more certainty. More, people will be more. It will be easier for them to vote yes, knowing that they will be maybe able to be part of the U.S. But before being the 51st state, you have to be independent first, and after that you will decide. But also the good news about that is, the Clarity Act. They're saying, that must be a majority. They have a strong majority or something like that. I don't remember the wording in the Clarity Act. But for me, 51%, that's it. You need to have 51% and more than 50%. And so if you are having your referendum and you're at 51%, and here in Canada the discussion, that's they don't have a big majority. So, but if the U.S. is saying 51%, it's okay, you're independent, because to be independent you need to be the recognition of other countries first. That's very important, and having a recognition by the U.S. that will be it. That will be. You won't need all these leaders, establishment leaders in Ottawa, Poliev or Carney. No, you just have 51%, you're not independent. If the U.S. said, I recognize that, you're independent, that's it. So that's a new development. We didn't have that in 1995. And in 1995, what we had people from all across English Canada coming to Quebec. We love you, don't go. So I can tell you, you won't have people coming from Quebec or other places, we love you, and stay in Canada. No, I'll be with you and saying, coming from Quebec, being at your campaign, if I'm invited, and telling you, yes, do it, because, it's the only way to have a real change in this country. And if we don't have that chance, you're going to be independent, and, that will be another country.
Now, you're a lawyer too, so you understand the Clarity Act a little bit.
Yeah.
And that came out of the movement out of Quebec. But they say a clear question and a clear majority.
Yeah.
They didn't say 50% plus one,
No.
or here's the question you should use.
Yeah.
They're going to leave it up to the House of Commons to debate these results.
Yeah.
So if it comes back at, let's say, 60% support, do you think the House of Commons is going to support it or fight against it?
I think they will do everything to fight against it. That's the federal government. That's the not only the government but the conservative and the liberals. Because that may be the end of Canada. And so if it's the end of Canada, they will all these establishment leaders won't have a job after that, because that can be the first one going independent, and the second one can be Quebec. I don't know, but for me, you need 51%, more than 50%, and that's it. And if you have the recognition from the U.S., it's a done deal for you guys.
Now, there's kind of two paths forward, just like any divorce. There's one where they work together, so with consent, and then there's one where they're kind of without consent. So the Clarity Act would be the one that's with consent.
Yeah.
So you're going through the process. Canada says yay or nay. Let's say they say yay. They start negotiating and start breaking up the house and the children and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if that is not a go, we have the other option, which would be basically non-consent, so a declaration of independence, like Kosovo did.
Yeah.
And that's where having the support of a country like the U.S. to recognize that independence would change the game, I think. Do you think if it came to that version of independence, that Canada would understand the position, maybe back the independence at that stage, like they did with Kosovo? Canada was one of the first countries to recognize Kosovo's independence. Or will they start having a continued trade falling out with the U.S. over this?
No, I think they will have to understand. If you have a recognition from the U.S. and you have 60%, like you said, or for me more than 50%, they will have to. But they will tell you during that referendum, if you vote yes, you'll need a big majority, and if you don't have that big majority, we won't do anything. So all these promises, like they did to Quebec, empty promises, they will go and tell you all that to try to appease to the people who are fed up with Ottawa. But don't believe them. It happened in Quebec. They told us, everything will change, we'll respect you, blah, blah, blah. Nothing happened. So they will come during that campaign and tell you all the things that you want to hear. But that would be fake.
Now, one of the paths forward that you mentioned is a new deal within Canada. So if the referendum comes back as yes, it's not like the very next day, boom, you're independent. There's going to be a lot more conversations and negotiations.
Yeah.
But one of them could be, well, we got a yes. Alberta is fed up. Now Ottawa needs to listen. I think of Danielle Smith, she would push for that one as well. I think you're alluding to seeing Canada come together under the Constitution and recognize at this time. How would that look to you? So let's say it is 60%. There's a bit of a fight in the House, but there's a door open for negotiation. Do you see Alberta stepping up to go ahead with that conversation and maybe bring another province or two to the table? I
think Alberta will work with Quebec at that time and the Quebec government, and they will put everything on the table. If you just have to look at the Constitution and look at what the federal government is doing today. So I think it will be in the advantage of Quebec and Alberta to be together and look, okay, we want a new deal. You have a lot of legitimacy because of that referendum. So let's go to Ottawa. And Ottawa will have to decide. If they don't, that will be the end. They will have to decide to stop, all these programs and infrastructures programs, money that they're giving to wars and the war in Ukraine, all that, it must end. That's not part of the mandate of the federal government in our Constitution. If you go to wars, you need to have a discussion in Parliament. If you give money to a country, we need to have a debate, but there's no debate about that. So everything that the federal government is doing, it will be something that Albertan, I believe, will ask for. And the federal government must do international relations and also being sure that this country is secure, defense, international relations, the monetary policy. And, it's the little immigration, but immigration the big scale, because every province can decide and can choose their immigrants in our constitution. But that's not happening now. It's only Quebec who can choose the immigrants. Why not Alberta? So all that would be on the table, and we may have a new Canada, and that will be better and more prosperous.
So possibly, Alberta votes yes in 2026. Quebec is pushing a little bit, but if the government of Carney doesn't recognize the will of the people of Alberta, that might be enough to get the Bloc Québécois and others to do a non-confidence. Could this be the end of the Carney government if they don't cooperate or sit down to negotiate?
Absolutely. You have a point there. The Bloc Québécois, and they will. Not only the Bloc Québécois, but also maybe the Conservatives, some MPs from Alberta may not follow the party line, and so that would be interesting. But you may have support from maybe the Bloc, but also from members of Parliament coming from the Conservative Party of Canada elected in Alberta. They may decide that, okay, my people are here, and I will vote in my people against my leader. That can happen. I don't know, but the door is open. That would be very interesting the next year, 2 or 3 years. It would be very interesting in Alberta, in Quebec, right now there's no big changes. I cannot see any big changes or bold reforms coming from the federal government, and so that can your referendum can start that, can open the door for all these reforms.
So I think that's kind of why this is a perfect time for this, because it can really ignite that conversation, reignite some of those passions for the different provinces to go ahead and have their sovereignty again. Now, if that did happen, do you think Saskatchewan and possibly Manitoba and part of BC, so the whole West, might get reignited on this whole West exit as well, kind of like Brexit?
I don't know. That would be their decision. I don't have any point of view about that. That can happen. You can have, Western Canada, Eastern Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. Everything can happen. But I really don't know.
So other than culture, what was the main reason for Quebec's decision to try and push forward with that referendum?
But it was, actually the Multiculturalism Act coming from Trudeau's father. He decided to promote multiculturalism at that time. That was not an act. Brian Mulroney did pass the legislation on multiculturalism just because to fight against Quebec and Francophone in Quebec and try to derate the Quebec culture. And now you still have that Multiculturalism Act in Canada, and people are coming here. They don't integrate to our values and our society. They are keeping their culture, and the federal government is promoting that. That is destroying our social fabric. It's a perfect storm with multiculturalism and mass immigration together. So at that time, that was that also. At that time, you had the discussion about the priorities. Quebec had different priorities than Ottawa. And for example, in the healthcare, the federal government was interfering in healthcare, giving money to Quebec with conditions. And the Quebec government said, no, we need to have the fiscal power to tax. So they wanted to have a fiscal room, the power to tax for their own responsibilities, like healthcare. That was not the case, and it's still not the case. And, the big discussion about keeping our culture at that time, that was important. But today, the debate in Quebec, if we have the PQ elected and if we have a referendum, like the leader of the PQ said a year after his election, I think immigration would play a central role here in Quebec. So the fact that it's nationalism is coming back in Quebec, here in Canada, and it's not negative. I believe it's positive. Yes, you must be open, you must have free trade, you must be open, but you must be able to control your own country. As you know, what happened in UK, they have Brexit, and they didn't want the EU to decide everything. Now here in Canada, it's Ottawa who's deciding everything. Ottawa is our EU, like for UK. So we need to change that, and that's why I'm very pleased that you will have that discussion to put all that on the table. And we believe at the People's Party that we have the best solution to keep this country united by respecting the Constitution and giving full autonomy to provincial provinces across the country.
Now, in this particular referendum, it's not just about leaving Canada. It would also be about leaving the monarchy.
Yeah.
So the king himself is the head of state, and Alberta would likely not bring that forward. So it would be a separation from the monarchy and Canada at the same time. So kind of a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
And recently, Quebec says they're not going to recognize the king. King Charles is their king.
Yeah.
So is that another topic that you think that kind of brings a perfect storm together, where we can talk about not our king, we're talking about not our carney,
Yeah.
and we're ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, that king is a globalist, a socialist, and, you know, he's not representing us. So, yeah, that would be a nice debate. You put all that together, and we'll see.
So in closing here, one of my concerns is one of Carney's first moves when he became prime minister, like elected prime minister, was to go to Europe and start some more
Yeah.
conversations there. And now Canada has joined a defense act with Europe
Yeah.
to go ahead and support them as well. Is this a step towards becoming more of a European country than we were a North American country?
But that he said it actually. He said that, you know, he feel like Canada is the most non-European country. But you know what I don't like with that deal and these deals, we are part of NATO, and NATO was supposed to be a defense agreement, and now it's an offense one. NATO is engaged with that war in Ukraine, with the US, and you know we must reconsider our position with NATO. You know, the People's Party is for peace, and we, since the beginning of that war, we said, you know, we must not put any and give any resources to that war. It is not our war, like also everything that is happening in Middle East. But so what Carney is doing right now, he said, you know, he is ready to work with Europeans. So for me, that means pushing, giving more resources to Ukraine, and that war in Ukraine may go more longer. And same thing for Polyev. On that, they have the same position. They're okay with the NATO of today. They're okay to give more resources to Ukraine, resources that we don't have, and they're okay to build a new relationship with the EU. For me, that's not. We must rethink our participation in NATO, because it is not a defense. Maybe we must have only an agreement with the US on our defense. We know that it's important for the US that the north of our country must be well protected, but that's not the case right now. We need to reinvest. I'm pleased with that. But instead of giving money to NATO and Ukraine, we must work for ourselves. So we are a North American country, and for me, Russia is not our enemy, and Trump is not our enemy. So that's a big difference with Polyev and Carney during the campaign. You know, Trump was the enemy of this country. And for me, you know, I respect the American. They decided to vote for Donald Trump, and he's the president right now. And we must be able to have a trade deal with him if we put everything on the table. But that being said, we are not European.
It's a good way to look at it from a global. We got to be good neighbors.
Yeah.
All our neighbors. What a concept.
Yeah.
Any last comments for Alberta?
No, Jason, I'm very pleased that you gave me that opportunity to speak about that. And I wish Albertans not good luck, big success. I hope that they will have that referendum in 2026. And don't be scared. And I hope that they will vote yes. And after that, we'll see what will happen. You'll have all the options in your pockets as Albertan. And, you know, if you're fed up with the federal government in Ottawa, I understand why. But for me, as the leader of the People's Party, I believe that we are the only hope for you guys. But you have these establishment politicians, Carney and Polyev, who think that the statu quo is okay. We are the only party that is saying no, and that's why, I'm telling Albertans, vote yes, because I don't like the statu quo, and the statu quo is not in line with our constitution. So I hope that you can stay in this country. I'm doing that fight as the leader of the party because, I want every province to be happy in Canada, to be prosperous, and the only way to do that is for our platform, the People's Party platform, to be adopted in Parliament, and we'll have the bold reforms that you asked for. But if you have to go through that referendum to be back in Canada or not, that's because of Poilievre and Carney, who are not answering to your request, and because of Poilievre that is taking your vote for granted. So I will tell Albertans and people who are living in where the by-election is in Alberta, if you want to send a message right now at this by-election, August 18, vote for our candidate, the People's Party candidate, Jonathan, and you'll send a strong message.
Well, thank you for your leadership with the PPC. Congratulations on your leadership review and your continued leadership with the PPC. Merci beaucoup.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Jason.
Well, there you go, Alberta. Here we have options. That status on Facebook for Alberta with Canada it's complicated. We're not sure where it's going to go, but we definitely have options. So on August 18th, make sure you show up and vote if you're in the riding, because this is going to be a little mini referendum for Pierre, for nationalism, and for Alberta sovereignty. So make sure you get out and vote and support the candidate that best supports your values. This is the election that we can actually support your values on. We don't have to worry about trying to get the other guy out because he can't. Go and show up and vote your values on this particular one. Thank you, Alberta. Have yourself a great day, and God bless.